All right, I want to get deeper into the weeds into kind of overcoming the cryopreservation challenges that exist. One of the things we do for our registrants is to have them provide some questions and topics that they're concerned about most and what they want to learn about most when attending our cell and gene lives. And so, overarchingly, one of the biggest topics is cryopreservation. And so, Ryan, I'd like to start with you. As commercial and clinical cell therapy products become more mainstream, there's been a little bit of a renewed focus on each step of the cryopreservation process and the reagents that are being used. And so I wanted to hear from your professional perspective, how are you and your team tackling some of those biggest issues in cryopreservation? And then coupled with that, um, what are the biggest industry trends and best practices um, that you and your team employ, kind of given the complex structure of freezing and thawing systems?
Yeah, thanks. Rookie kind of stole the show. He's very he hit it right on the head, talking about, you have opportunities when you're going into first in human and you're designing first in human platforms that you have the expectation will be commercial. You should have that commercial mindset from the start. And so from a materials perspective, looking at some redundancies in raw materials that you can use to be able to get to get that data, to be able to show that you're not single source requirements on kind of the upfront efforts. So really put the time into understanding your raw material impacts and see if you can actually get some redundancy in your supply chain there for cryopreservation. And I think understanding again that window of temperature stability that you have during the cryopreservation process is important. We a lot of times just in an academic setting, we'll throw it into a cryo freeze, we'll throw it into the freezer and assume that's good enough. But I think understanding, controlled rate freezers have allowed us to really study the freezing process and understanding how glass transition temperatures impact cells. So there's been a lot of studies around that. But again, deviations throughout that process cause impacts when you're at the commercial scale. And then again, on that shipping, really understanding what that range is and building off of what Rookie said is that, we have an opportunity in those first in human studies to be able to really pressure test what that range is to allow for a safe product to be delivered to your patients. And so it's really an opportunity when you're early on, like we are at Umoja, to get as much data as we can to try to limit the headaches for the commercial team, the deviations at a commercial scale. So we're putting a lot of focus on that effort, really just enhancing our data package for understanding of how to make a safe drug product. From a trends perspective, I think one thing I was talking about with my supply chain team, it's fascinating in that how the supply chain world has moved into. I think Amazon has changed the way we think about it. We can track a widget that's being shipped on a minute by minute basis, yet that expectation hasn't necessarily made it to that degree of transparency hasn't made it to our drug products. We tend to throw an extra temp tail in and we look at the data after it's been shipped to confirm that it tracked correctly. What I'm super excited about, and I see where the trend's going, is that expectation that we should actually be able to track our temperatures real time. There are some companies doing it, and there's a lot of value to be able to have that, know where things are, really study the shipping process from a temperature perspective, real time, knowing where your products are. I'm excited about the opportunities there.
Good, thank you. And it's funny you mentioned the Amazon component of it. A few months ago, when Rookie and I were chatting on the phone, and Rookie, you'll probably back me up on this in a second here. We talked, or he mentioned, excuse me, during our call, that how interesting it is that Amazon, we can in our personal lives track a a pair of pants and have it in our door in 2 days, but that this is that we can't figure this out. But it's good to hear, certainly, that we're moving in the right direction. So Rookie, I want to give you also the exact same opportunity to provide information from your perspective on, some of the biggest challenges with cryopreservation, even in more detail than what you offered at the top, which was great. How do you and your team tackle some of those biggest issues in cryopreservation? And then, if you could talk us through some of the industry trends and best practices that you and your team employ, like we said, given the complex structure of freezing and thawing systems?
Sure. So first, I'll give the positives of cryopreservation. What's nice is it's really cold, and when you have all the right systems in place, it's fairly easy to manage and keep it cold. But those systems are very expensive. So the downside to cryopreservation is that it's very expensive. The more drug product you have, or the more material you have that you're trying to ship, leads to choices in bigger, heavier, more expensive logistics for shipping those. And then, of course, there's just the aspect of all of the protective equipment that you have to wear, how difficult it is sometimes to, with big gloves on, handle small cassettes, to pull tiny things out of the core of a cryo shipper. So there's good and there's bad. What I like about cryopreservation is the flexibility it gives you. So, for example, when you're shipping drug product out to a site of care, to a hospital, et cetera, they may or may not have their own cryopreservation tanks, their own storage system. So you have some flexibility. If your shipper has a long hold time, you have some flexibility to use that basically as the freezer to hold that product until the patient is ready to be infused. But again, the downside of it is it's a very large vessel that's sitting in somebody's room. You've got to worry about chain of custody. Are you keeping it safe? All of those kinds of things. Also, sometimes it's difficult to get those large LN2 shippers on regional planes. So your logistics lanes can be limited by the liquid nitrogen shipper that you choose. And there are multiple options out there, different sizes. Again, the smaller they are, the less time they hold. So I do prefer it. Like Ryan was saying, dry ice is cold, but it's tough to control. It evaporates. It creates gaps in the box. You kind of have these up and down temperature spikes and readings that are more about pockets of air inside the shipper when that gas or when that dry ice evaporates, versus liquid nitrogen vapor phase. That temperature stays steady as long as the shipper is holding it in place. So I do, there's advantages and disadvantages to that versus other options. There are some new cryo shippers out there that do like -120. So again, back to our conversation about finding the right temperature for your material, your product, but being aware of the supply chain offerings that are out there for those temperature ranges, and understanding the positives and the negatives of those various shipping systems. There are some that are -120 that you can plug in and they kind of keep recharging. So there's lots of options out there, but generally speaking, LN2 is expensive, heavy,